I'm here with Elliot Block this morning, and we're going to talk about minimizing heat stress as that time of year is quickly approaching again. Welcome, Elliot. How are you today?
Very good. Thanks, Walt.
Elliot, tell us a little bit about some of the tips that you talk to producers about when you start discussing minimizing heat stress.
Well, the overall goal of minimizing heat stress, you can't really change the weather outside. What we can do is change some of the ways we do things so that cows are not really exposed at the hottest part of the days to do what we're expecting them to do, which is make milk and eat feed. So one of the things that we try to do is see if we can slowly, as spring approaches, change some habits in delivering feed such that we're delivering the fresh feed at the coolest times of the day, because cows usually come up to the bunk as soon as you put new feed down, and certainly if it's cooler outside, they'll tend to eat more. We also like to recommend increasing your push-outs and clean-outs, mainly for two reasons. One is that when you push up feed, you're going to stimulate cows to come over and eat some more. Other thing is that during the heat, we certainly wind up with more feed spoilage going on, so the more frequently you can change that or get rid of the old feed, the better it is for the cows to maintain their dry matter intake. What we also like to recommend is to sort of rework the ration for summer, for heat stress. And there are three major points here. One is that what you're trying to do is reduce the amount of heat that the cow is going to generate herself, and she generates a lot of heat by fermenting feeds in the rumen. So one of the things we like to do is, within normal recommendations, is increase the amount of ruminally inert fats, providing more energy from fat and maybe slightly less from fiber and carbohydrates, again, maintaining the amounts that we need to at least maintain rumen function, mainly because the fats are not fermented in the rumen and don't generate any extra heat. In doing that, you should boost your bypass protein levels, because as you take some of those carbohydrates out of the ration, you're also going to be reducing the amount of rumen fermentation and bacterial protein, giving the cow some protein that she needs. So basically, you're going to substitute the bacterial protein with some bypass protein. Also, we always recommend that you work with your nutritionist, making sure that you can maintain your peak performance in hot weather, or at least as close to as possible. We all realize that feed intake and milk production will take a hit when things are hot, but we can do things to mitigate that so you're not losing as much as you would otherwise lose because of the heat. In fact, the third change that we recommend for the summer, we also have a year-round recommendation for this, but increasing ration potassium. We know that cows are going to lose a lot of potassium, not just in the milk that they normally make, but also in sweat and salivation and increased urination. They lose quite a bit of potassium. The potassium levels that are generally recommended as required are probably insufficient to cover their losses, and we recommend raising potassium levels to at least 1.7% of the dry matter. In doing that, you're going to raise the DCAD value, and you can do that with both potassium and sodium. We recommend this to be in the 35 to 45 range for DCAD, because as we increase DCAD, we increase the animal's blood buffering capacity. One of the physiological effects of heat stress is that it sends them into a slight acidosis. So increasing the DCAD can certainly counteract that.
Elliot, what are some of the potential pitfalls that producers often encounter when they start making changes to rations to anticipate minimizing heat stress, which may actually compound the problem?
Some of the problems that we get into when the rations are done improperly is you wind up increasing the heat stress. Some people feel that if you reduce the forage value, the amount of forages, you're going to reduce the amount of fermentation that's going on. They wind up substituting in carbohydrates, other carbohydrates like starches and sugars that can actually be worse than fermenting fiber, and then wind up not adjusting the protein. The biggest problem really is that we know the cows are going to reduce their feed intake. If they reduce their feed intake, you still want them to get the right amount of nutrients. So what you have to do really is make the ration more concentrated rather than less concentrated to deliver the protein and energy that the cows need to make the milk you're expecting.
Elliot, you've talked a little bit about some of the feeding things that can be done to help minimize heat stress. What are some of the facilities or management things that can be done to minimize heat stress?
One of them was the feeding frequency and times of day that you would feed. Another one is the water availability. I think that some people just don't pay attention to this as much as they should during the summer, especially when cows will be drinking more water. You have to make sure that you have enough water pressure, especially during the times that you're using the most water on the farm. It's nice to have a lot of watering troughs and watering bowls, but if there's not enough pressure, those cows are going to drink the bowl dry before they ever get a chance to refill. So water pressure is something that should be looked into before the heat actually hits. Another one is if you don't have water available at the parlor exits, that's one of the places that cows are most thirsty immediately after milking. So if you can arrange to have copious amounts of water available as they move out of the parlor without, of course, blocking the exit lanes because they'll hang around there for a little bit, it's certainly a recommended practice to have this water available immediately after milking. The other one is stocking density. Keeping stocking density at or below 100% and having at least 30 inches of feed bunk space per cow is essential. These cows, when they start crowding in, if you ever get down in between them, it gets pretty hot when they're crowded together. And they'll tend to stay away from the feed bunk if they feel that they're going to overheat just getting up to the feed bunk. Shading, I think, seems very logical, but you would be surprised how many people don't put shades in the proper places or having the proper coverage. Dry lots, for example, the ideal orientation of the shading is north-south with a minimum of a 14-foot high shade to provide the most coverage and to allow air movement. Sometimes these shaded areas, they put the shades up too low and you wind up trapping heat, not enough air movement. Ventilation, of course. Hopefully everybody's facilities are ventilated properly so that the cooling and the ventilation can really kick in as soon as the temperature gets up to 68 degrees. That's slightly below the temperature that heat stress starts at, but once your temperature is getting to 68 degrees, those fans should be working to cool that barn down. And the last one is soakers. And what people have to realize is that it's not wetting the cows that reduces the heat stress. It's actually the evaporation of that water that relieves some of the heat stress that these cows are feeling. So what you should be doing is wetting the cows just about down to the skin and then allow the cows to dry off. The more wet-dry cycles per hour that you have, obviously the more cooling that you can achieve. And there are certain recommendations that have come out. Dr. John Smith at Kansas State has done an excellent job at elaborating these. Basically, when the temperature gets up to 70 degrees, you should be going through a wet-dry cycle every 15 minutes. When the temperature gets warmer to 80 degrees, it should be every 10 minutes. And then at 90 degrees, where the cows will dry off pretty quickly, it should be every 5 minutes. This has been shown quite a number of times to really alleviate the heat stress to a great extent and allow the cows to eat and produce more. The other thing is, where do you put these soakers in evaporative cooling? Probably cooling, one of the most heat-stressed areas of the facility is usually the holding pen in the milking parlor. Most people will recommend that if you're going to put cooling anywhere, that's the first place it should be put. Then it would be over the feed bunk. Then it would be over the walking areas.
Great, thank you. Appreciate your time today, Elliot. Great tips you've shared on minimizing heat stress.
Thanks, Walt.